And we are live, folks. This is a podcast for all seasons. I'm Josh Mundy, and today we're doing season 3, episode 3. And we're going to be reviewing the show Lucifer, Fox's show Lucifer. I think it's about 5 episodes in now. And so we wanted to do the pilot when it came out, and we just didn't get a chance to hammer down just a review on the season pilot. But we wanted to do something that, where since we didn't get a chance to do the pilot, kind of review several episodes and see. We don't typically get a chance to do this. This is something new for us. The only time we tend to do something like this is when we do a mid-season review. But Eric thought it would be a good idea to review several. And speaking of Eric, as you know, with me as always is Eric Joseph. And what I'll do is I'll turn it over to him, and then Eric, why don't you get us started? We're gonna go kind of immediately into the pilot first, and then I think we should kind of, after we've said all we need to say about that, then kind of go as the series has moved forward. So why don't you start us off?
Hi, everybody, and hi, Josh. This is Eric Joseph, and as he said, we're talking Lucifer, and yes, I believe he was right, 5 episodes up to this point. I'm kind of wondering if it's going to be fresher in Josh's head because I've been watching the show week to week, whereas he has just caught up over the past few days. And with all DC TV shows, we like to say something about them after they first start airing. But as he kind of said, we usually are able to get to them right after we air. And for whatever reason, we haven't been able to get an episode going for the past month or so. But yeah, for Lucifer, I'm going to say what I have to say, and I think I'm going to kind of lump in what I have to say about the first 5 episodes and the pilot because, for me, it's been about 4 or 5 weeks since I've seen the pilot. I will say that it's a very good show. It shows a lot of promise. I think Josh will probably touch on this a little more because it was one of his bewilderments, but I kind of hate to start out with almost a criticism, even though it's not bad by any means, but just the why a show about Lucifer is a cop procedural. So far it's worked. I've liked every episode, but it's still kind of an odd fit because it's really more so inspired by the Lucifer comics from Vertigo, and I admit I really haven't read any Lucifer comics other than the current run from DC. I've read all 3.
You cut out a second there, Eric.
They've lightened up a little bit, but I don't know. You can kind of play the characters sympathetic, though, with a hint of villainy to them, which they're doing more so lately. But I kind of think that networks have fallen too much into this procedural trapping because I think cop procedurals are to primetime television what Call of Duty has done to the video game industry. It seems
said.
Everything needs to be I mean, it's worked for iZombie, but to do it again for Lucifer, which seemed like an even more of an odd fit. I that was funny when Supernatural, I think it was either in the mid-season finale or then the mid-season premiere, there was a discussion between Lucifer and Sam when they were in the cage, and Sam asked him, well, when you defeat the darkness, what do you plan on doing? And Lucifer said, I was thinking of moving to Los Angeles and helping solve crimes. And right, it was just so funny because it kind of was like a backhand at the notion that because Supernatural's version of Lucifer seems more like a pure depiction of what you would think of, you know, the devil, so to speak. So when it comes out of his mouth that he would be solving crimes, it does sound quite funny. But like I said, the way they portray him on the show does work, because it's also the notion he does have this sense to punish people, but is it, you know, is he evil by nature, or was he given a job that he was assigned to do? Because there's also this looming threat. If Lucifer doesn't go back to hell, Amenadiel is going to be assigned the job, and he really does not want it. um I believe right now in the comics, Mazikeen is the ruler of hell. So that's a possible direction they could go in, because it's obvious she wants to go back to hell and she loves torturing people. But you never know. It's an adaptation. But as for the actor, Tom Ellis, I mean, he really does make the show. He has a lot of charisma. He's funny. Um, you know, it was really apparent right from the start of the pilot that they really did find the right actor for this version of Lucifer, and I do enjoy his sense of humor on the show. I mean, I'd immediately text a friend when they mentioned the term Eiffel Tower, and then he tried to explain to uh, her name's slipping my mind, but the female detective that he helps out on the show, and then, you know, she didn't want to hear any of it. Uh,
It's Chloe. It's Chloe Decker, by the way, Detective Chloe Decker.
yeah, that's right. But while each week it is a good show, I guess this is so far, you know, my commenting of where it's gone a few episodes since and maybe where it's going forward. It's they need a better hook to get you to watch week to week, because you watch any DC TV show and they have this overarching story, you know, something that keeps you coming back. And like I said, while every episode is good, I guess the hook is Lucifer becoming mortal, and then the whole thing of, you know, who's going to have to take over hell. But I don't think that's a strong enough hook. Um, Maybe some people will agree with me. I guess we'll see what Josh has to say about that in a minute. But they do have a pretty good supporting cast. DB Woodside as Amenadiel. Their portrayal of Angels, I kind of see it as amalgam of how Supernatural and Constantine did it, because we kind of have the whole slowing down of time thing. It was kind of interesting in that one episode where Lucifer used that to his advantage. Uh, though I kind of don't know how Lucifer couldn't just do that himself, because he's an angel anyway. Though maybe, I don't know, maybe some of his powers faded when he willingly gave up his wings. I don't quite know how uh, their mythology is working. It would be interesting to see if they eventually bring, you know, God into the show, because Supernatural has had it in the past, and they're going to before the end of this season. But I'm assuming Lucifer is going to be a 13 episode season, but I think, as far as I know, it's come to strong ratings, so I'm sure Fox thinks they have a hit. And starting this Monday with Gotham's return, now they have their own DC TV block on Monday nights, so they have their claim to fame along with the CW, and of course it's still competing with Supergirl. Uh, kind of, I do kind of wish Supergirl was in a different time slot or on a different night. Not to get too sidetracked, as Gotham this season is now starting to have me hooked. Uh, but I'll kind of give a score right now, and maybe I'll mention a few more things. But for me, it's still a little too early to get entirely in depth, and you know, maybe we're not going in depth as we did with Legends of Tomorrow, because we're not working with as many characters. But I would say the Lucifer pilot, I would give about an 8.5, and then the series to this point, I would give an 8. So, Josh, what have been your thoughts on Lucifer after doing your binge?
Well, yeah, the binge, I'll tell you what, the binge works really well for getting a, general idea of how a show flows and whether or not that flow seems like it's organic. It's kind of difficult if you watch a lot of TV to get the idea of that flow from week to week. Especially if you're watching several shows in the period of that week. And, whereas they tend to try and do the justice to the viewer who they know is watching several shows of, previously on this episode or previously on the show. And the Flash does that, and Arrow does that, and so many others. And even really popular syndicated shows like The Big Bang Theory will do it if they're trying to, recall the memories of people to something that was previously important. And but the binge definitely is done well for this show because you definitely get a flow for the way that they're moving the show. And I also don't know enough about the Vertigo character of Lucifer aside from basic things that I've read about it, but I haven't delved into the comics themselves. And I mean, it is an interesting premise that he decides he's not gonna be the ruler of hell anymore just because he's kind of bored with it after 10 billion years or something like that. But I do think it is interesting. It's definitely a little bit wonky to have, let's do a procedural with the devil helping to solve crimes, because it doesn't really, you would think that at least the stereotypical portrayal of the devil is, he would very much be on the side of the criminals. And the way that they explain that away in the shows is that he actually, it's not just that his premise or his intention or his job or whatever you want to call it is to punish people, but that he actually enjoys seeing people be punished. And one of the things I think they've done well in the show is they've with specifically, it's kind of this it kind of speaks to the whole, oh dear God, why did this thing happen to me? Or the devil made me do it. And his whole thing is, oh, don't blame God for your horrible decisions, or don't blame the devil either. We're like he doesn't even necessarily blame God for everything. I mean, he does do it several times in the show where he's kind of like, oh, if you get a beef, you need to take that with the big man upstairs kind of thing. And I don't know that he specifically says that out loud, but he definitely infers something along the lines. But when there are other instances where bad people are doing very bad things and they're kind of like, it's not my fault. And he's like, yeah, but it is though. And you've got no one else to blame but yourself. And the whole devil made me do it argument doesn't really stand. He's like, I didn't make you do anything. And if I didn't make you do anything, then no one's making you do anything. And, you guys have made your bed, humanity's made their bed. And now you've got to deal with, the results of your choices. And that's an interesting thing. It's very Paradise Lost, antagonist Satan and or the devil or Lucifer. And they portray that. Obviously the Lucifer comics, that's really where Gaiman's vision of Lucifer came from, is very much based off of John Millen's Paradise Lost. And he's an anti-hero more than he is a pure definitive evil. And although he's raging against the machine that is, Godhead or whatever you want to call it, but they're not portraying him specifically that way in the show. As far as the show is concerned, though, it's an interesting take. I'm not a big fan of the procedural, and so that's a weakness as far as this show is concerned. I mean, Gotham isn't even so much of a procedural, even though it has those elements, because it just so happens that the characters are cops. It's not that, it's a procedural and we're meeting the characters of the cops in the procedural. It's the characters of the cops, and so the cops just happen to do things that are similar to a procedural, if you catch my meaning. And I think that that's one of the benefits that Fox's Gotham has had, for example. But in this particular case, I do think that the procedural works a little bit. And again, it's because they've put the emphasis on Lucifer's desire to see bad people punished. It's his job, but it's something that he actually, there's the there's the old trope of if you do what you love, then you'll never work a day in your life. Well, if that's the case, then Lucifer's not doing any work at all. He's pretty much, doing what he enjoys in terms of punishing people. But obviously there was something about that lifestyle that he didn't love because he left hell. So, 10 billion years is a long time. I don't know if they'll touch on that specific thing in the show, but if they do give you an indication of how long he was in hell and, why he decided to leave, other than just sheer boredom. But I won't get into things that have happened after the pilot because I want to just talk about the pilot specifically. But Lauren German is the actress who plays Chloe Decker, who is the LAPD homicide detective that is helping Lucifer, or rather Lucifer's helping her solve homicides and various things. And I think that she actually does a really good job. The premise being that he has an extreme influence over people's desires, and he has the ability not necessarily to read people's minds. He kind of says, I'm not a magician or I'm not God. But he says that people want to tell me their deepest, darkest desires. It's almost like a confessional. You see people fight it sometimes, and you see people kind of saying things and they don't quite know why they're saying them to this person who's just asked a very simple question. And then there are other people who wantonly tell him exactly what their deepest, darkest desires. And I guess the best way I could kind of make a comparison to something is they did something similar to this in The Mentalist, where he regularly would hypnotize people, and he kind of emphasized that there are certain types of people that it was like, oh, she's almost practically hypnotized already. Like that was a quote that, from the show, where it was like, I'm only going to have to tip her a little bit to basically get her into a hypnotic state that she's going to tell me everything I need to know. And Lucifer is acting kind of in that way. And certain people are much more susceptible to it, to the point that they really don't even need his influence to the greatest degree. And then there are others, specifically her, Chloe Decker, that fight it almost completely, almost entirely. And we've only ever seen her break a very, very slight bit in terms of her defenses against his influence. It's a pretty interesting thing. The character of her husband is played by Kevin Alejandro, who was he was in season, at least 1 or 2 seasons of True Blood.
He was Brother Blood on Arrow season.
Yeah, and Brother Blood on Arrow. So people who have seen obviously DC shows are going to recognize him from that. People who have seen HBO's True Blood, they'll recognize him from that as well. And then DB Woodside's Amendiel, or however you pronounce that crazy name. Amendiel. Yeah, so he's definitely an interesting character. Eric mentioned this already, is the idea that he shows up, and it kind of reminds me of Supernatural when the Archangels first showed up. They were ludicrously powerful, and they had this great influence on the environment and things that were going on around them. And they obviously pulled that back significantly in later seasons, as they tended to do with a lot of things in Supernatural. Demons used to be extremely powerful, and then Sam and Dean are fighting them with fisticuffs and whatnot, which is very humorous to people who have watched that show for a long time. But he's obviously very, very powerful. He's an angel. You don't necessarily get the idea that he's an archangel or anything. They don't necessarily, verify his specific hierarchy in the hierarchy of angels. But he's obviously very powerful, to the point that even Lucifer has a very legitimate fear of him, if only, a martial fear of him. He definitely is. He in one scene, he holds up his wing to Lucifer's throat, and you get the idea that the wings are dangerous. They could cut you, or they're very sharp or dangerous. And Lucifer's kind of like, he has a hint of kind of do it in his eyes, but he also has this hint of legitimate fear, while simultaneously kind of having like, oh, do it and dad's going to be really upset, kind of thing, which is a very interesting take on the God Lucifer relationship also, that they touch on, which is the idea that maybe God could destroy him, but he doesn't because he needs Lucifer to do his thing, which is an interesting take on that concept. But Mazikeen's the last major character, other than the Doctor, who really rounds out the cast. Leslie Ann Brandt, who plays one of his allies, one of the former demons, as it were, from hell, who's come up to Earth with him. She kind of plays his bodyguard / protector, which, for them claiming this trope, she doesn't tend to do much of that, which is interesting. But she was on. She played in Spartacus, Star's Spartacus show for, I believe, at least a season. So she hasn't really done a whole lot else. But she does a good job. She's very attractive, as is Lauren German. So, as their female leads, they're doing a good job. I actually really, really liked the young girl who plays Chloe Decker's daughter. I think she actually does a pretty decent job. Kids are normally really, really annoying on television shows like this, and I think she actually does a pretty good job. She kind of plays devil's advocate, which is obviously probably intentional and very humorous, to Lucifer's intentions for the Chloe Decker character. She's kind of like, yeah, Lucifer's a good guy, Mom. Like, why don't you like him like I do? And obviously she sees a bunch more than her young, innocent, gullible, naive daughter does, but it is very humorous at this kid, who Lucifer openly admits that he hates. Kids that he takes a shine to her and vice versa. It's kind of a humorous little take. But the pilot was solid. I'm not totally sold on the idea of the procedural and Lucifer helping solve crimes on Earth for a homicide detective. But that being said, it actually does work fairly decent in the way that they've...
it's better than if we got a medical drama with Lucifer.
right.
That would be the other big thing.
Lucifer, MD. Yeah, that would have been an interesting take. I mean, I will say that I think that the show, it opens up. I've mentioned this several times in the show in terms of other media where the premise that they're setting is much larger than what is actually happening in the show. And I mean, this even happens in Supernatural, for example, where that's a very big show with a very big premise, and yet there's still so much going on behind the scenes that they really don't touch on. That if they really decided to, there's a lot of meat there to get into exposition about these various things. And specifically with Lucifer, the show Lucifer, and the character of Lucifer, we don't know the relationship between him and Mazikeen, who's again his protector. We don't really know anything about D.B. Woodside's Mendiel. We get the idea that, yes, God wants him to essentially take over. It is interesting that there needs to be someone punishing people in hell, like that has to be. And I'm assuming that likewise in, say, a Supernatural, they could maybe go towards a position of, well, when you don't have someone lording over hell, eventually the demons in hell are going to go buck wild. And maybe that'll eventually happen in the show. I don't know to what degree. But the one thing that they touch on in the show, and it's kind of, if there is an overarching, emphasis that's going forward in the show, and it's that he is definitely changing who he is in terms of personality, but also he's even having physiological changes in terms of the fact that he's immortal, he's invulnerable, he can't bleed, he can't die, he doesn't feel in the same way, he's not prey to his emotions like humans tend to be, and he definitely changes, and part of the influence is this detective, partially because she does not seem to be affected by his partially because she's not affected by his influence, and you don't know the answer to why yet, other than the fact that maybe she's just a much stronger-willed, stronger-minded person. So going forward, the changes in Lucifer and the reasons why Chloe can resist Lucifer, those are definitely things that they'll have to touch on in the rest of the season. But as far as the overarching scene, yeah, we haven't really got much on that. I won't give it an 8. I'd say I'd give it about a 7, 7.5. It has yet to really impress me, although the actor Tom Ellis has definitely impressed me. He is very charming, and even Lauren German's or German, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Their characters are definitely, they work well together. They definitely have some intriguing chemistry. Tom Ellis was a good choice. He's extraordinarily charming, and I think he's going to do a good job. I mean that they're going to be able to develop that relationship and those characters going forward in a very good way. But I just don't know, what, if there is enough meat on the show to really make for going forward, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons that people are going to want to stay tuned to. But so yeah, 7.5. And so now that we've talked about the pilot, Eric, you want to kind of go on about the rest of the season as it is so far, the next 4 episodes?
Well, I pretty much spoke my piece on that. I'll just say, to reiterate, that the quality of each individual episode has me coming back each week, but they're going to need some stronger hooks. Like Supernatural, like Constantine, they need to broaden this beyond the procedural, because it really is just a week-to-week show at this point.
Right. I mean, I will say this. I mean, that what is the strength of the procedural? Why is NCIS and Criminal Minds and all these various procedurals, why are they getting these massive audiences week in, week out? And one of the reasons is because, my grandmother can turn on an episode of Criminal Minds if she missed last night's episode or last week's episode, and she's not losing anything in terms of the overarching story. I mean, I know that of all of those shows, the most that I've ever watched was SVU, which is Law and Order SVU, which is not a show that I enjoy, but it's just unfortunately I worked in an environment where the people that I worked with tend to watch the show very, very regularly against my desires and wishes. But that you got to see, character developments over the course of the season that you wouldn't necessarily see a episode to episode change. And only when you're really watching from season to season do you see that these characters have changed dramatically. And that's really the boon of the procedural, is that anyone can tune in at any given time, and they're going to be given an episode that's going to stand on its own two wings or its own merits, and it's going to succeed in that way because you don't have to have this deep, plotting mythology. Why don't people jump in and just start collecting X-Men comics? It's because you've got years and years and years and years of mythology that you've got to basically break into. Why did that make the New 52 so lucrative? Because all of a sudden now people had a chance to jump in and start collecting Superman or Batman and not necessarily have to be inundated with 70 years of backlog and backstory. So I think this
is the age of the binge watch, though, because a decade ago when shows like 24, Prison Break, and Lost really changed the game for prime time, everything has become much more serialized. And, it's, when it comes time for Lucifer to be on Netflix or something like that, will Lucifer be able to hook people like, say, The Flash does?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, The Flash is not only is an exceptional show, as we've talked about, but it's got a really good hook, and it's got that overarching story that makes you want to come back and see how things are going to change. Yeah, I mean, that's not something that I really had considered, and it's definitely a good consideration to make. The fact that you've got the age of Netflix, like you said, people are binge watching. I mean, I will say this, Gotham, for example. Gotham was not a show that got me week to week in a heavy, deep influence, and it didn't give me, deep in its clutches in terms of wanting to watch it week to week. And typically what I'll do is I'll let several episodes build up and then I'll watch them. And it actually does better for me that way. It serves me better simply because not only am I getting a more specific indication of what's going on than I do, when I'm watching it week to week. Because as I said several times on this show before, I watch more TV than almost anyone else I know. I watch several seasons of television. I'm sorry, several shows at any given time, and usually I'll binge watch something that I hadn't caught up on. So I watched the entire season of Downton Abbey in 3 days or something like that, which is granted it's only 10 episode season, but I'll watch an entire season of that, and come March I'm going to watch an entire season of Kevin Spacey's Netflix show House of Cards in probably less than a week's time, and while simultaneously watching several other shows on a week-to-week basis. So when you are watching these binge episodes, like I've pretty much done with Lucifer, thanks to the beauty that is Hulu, it makes it a lot easier. But that means that they're gonna have to break away from the procedural. Whereas, like I said, you definitely have the boon of the procedural is that you can just chime in, and it works really great for week-to-week TV. But yeah, simultaneously in the age of digital watching and the binge watch, they're going to need to quote a highly underrated song from the 90s, Blues Traveler's Hook. The hook will bring you back. It really doesn't matter what is said. It doesn't really matter if the lyrics make sense, because it's the hook that's going to make people think about that song. That's one of the better lyrical songs of the 90s. But yeah, likewise, the show is going to it doesn't really matter how great things are happening from week to week. People will overlook weaknesses in plot development or character development on Arrow if that season's overarching hook is definitely better. And why don't people care that in Flash season 2 that yet we have another speedster? Because it's a really strong hook, and it's unique enough that people want to come and they want to see it. So yeah, I agree with Eric wholeheartedly. Yeah, they definitely need a stronger hook. But we're only 5 episodes in, but there's only going to be 12 episodes this season, I believe.
Is that? Did you just look it up?
Well, I mean, they've got them listed on Wikipedia page with a fantastic title of episode 12, #Team Lucifer, which is just hilarious. But yeah, it looks like it's only going to be a 12 episode season. So,
and this is so weird with the amount of episodes each DC TV show is getting. Flash and Arrow get 23, Gotham gets 22, Supergirl gets 20, iZombie gets 19, and I read conflicting reports of Legends of Tomorrow getting 13 or 16. Now Lucifer gets 12.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, for example, 16, I think 16 is a really solid episode number for, say, a Netflix exclusive show where you're basically binge watching. You've got a 45 or a 50-minute episode, no commercials, and you can get just enough exposition, or just that amount more exposition per episode than you could in a 42-minute serialized episode on television. 10 episode seasons work really great for, say, Showtime. They worked really great for the BBC, where you've got 50. Well, no, I mean, they do for the BBC. They do. I know that Doctor Who, notwithstanding, a lot of the seasons of television that are on, Masterpiece, BBC's Masterpiece, they are maybe 10 episode seasons, and they're 50 minutes a piece, 53-minute episodes at 10 episodes a season. When you do the math, it's basically, it's basically one of those things where you can get a lot of exposition, but yeah, it's a strange number though, 12. I just don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't know why they would decide on that episode. 13 actually would make sense to me. 12 is weird, but 13 makes sense because 13 is, considered this kind of unlucky number. It often, gets these ties
Well, it's
to.
also kind of like one of the default amount of episodes for TV because normally
Yeah.
they use like 6 episodes as a testing ground, even though they want you to go at least 13. Then if they feel you're really doing well, you get the back 9 order because 22 is usually what you go to. But like Gotham season 1 was originally 16 episodes, but Fox liked it enough to where they upped it to 22. So we got like this weird padding with well, we won't get into it, but I think we talked about it like in the fall, just that weird padded story with Fish Mooney and the doll maker that you could just take right out of Gotham season 1 and it wouldn't have made a difference at all.
Yeah, I think that that's something that they're gonna need to stay. I mean, but when you've got that many episodes, you can throw a little fluff in there and just to fill up the episodes, to fill up the season order, and people are granted it will add to it, but it's not going to take away from it significantly. Like you said, if you didn't have it at all, um, but I will say the show's doing pretty well. I mean, according to Wikipedia's critical reception, it's doing okay. It's Rotten Tomatoes, which one thing that people kind of need to indicate is that, when you look at everyone always kind of says, oh, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's only got 49%. That's 100% true because critically, the critics are giving it a 49%, but the audience average is 86%. It's getting a 4.2 out of 5. They do a 5-point rating over on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's a much better review. In Metacritic, they like to do an aggregate of literally every single review website, and it's only getting about a 49 out of 100, which again sounds horrible. But if you look at IMDb or TV.com, where they're doing literally only user reviews mixed in with critical reviews, it's getting an 8.6 and an 8.2 respectively out of 10. So people tend to like it, and really that's all that matters because no one gives a shit what the critics have to say anymore. They just don't care. And if you don't believe me, just, no one went and saw The Danish Girl. No one gives a shit. But, they don't care that movie got nominated for 3 Oscars, and they don't care that, Eddie Redmayne's, a delight, an absolute delight. No one cares. No one gives a shit. I'll go see him in, whatever, the next J.K. Rowling movie because it's Harry
And I'm
Potter.
going to have to work absolute delight into a comic book review this next week.
It's an absolute delight.
Unless they'll get on a dust jacket when a trade paperback comes out or something.
Yeah, you know what it is?
Absolute delight, Dark Knight News.
It's because everybody spent way too much time listening to Robert Leach's, Rich and Famous People show, and they think that just because someone says something in a British accent, then that must mean it's an intelligent statement. So it's an absolute delight. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, no, it's but anyway, no, Lucifer isn't fantastic. It's a good show. It's a very solid show. I will say the craziest thing about Lucifer is that I was a very big fan of Californication, which was produced and written by Tom Kapanos, who's this show's creator, and he's helped on some of the screenplays for this show as well. And it is as much of a change of pace as you could possibly have in terms of tone. And that was as much of a change in pace as his previous job, which was on Dawson's Creek, of all things. So that guy is apparently going for world's most eclectic career. That'll be on his tombstone, I assume, eventually.
I think I need to work a delightful romp into a review eventually.
Yes. The latest issue of Superman was a delightful romp.
It needs to be for like a horror book too, like The Dark and Bloody or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, because the writer for Dark and Bloody apparently liked what I had to say about the first issue in my Vertigo roundup, but I don't. At the same time, now that I know he's reading my reviews, I don't want him to think I'm patronizing or anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so would you suggest to the people listening to catch a couple episodes of Lucifer and make a decision for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely watch the show. I mean, you'll probably like some aspect of it. I mean, there's one of several things that will get you. I mean, if you like a procedural, if you like, if you like, you know, DC Comics, uh, if if you just want something with a bit of humor and a charming lead actor, and then you have kind of this. I guess I would almost call it heavenly politics or whatever. That's we see it in the current Lucifer Vertigo series, but it's a much different beast. Um, I kind of think the current Lucifer products are kind of for different audiences, even though they want people to enjoy both. But yeah, I mean, it's no coincidence that they've launched another Lucifer comic book series in time for the TV show. But at the same time, it's not like Adventures of Supergirl, which is directly tied to the TV show or something like that. No, this is the comic book Lucifer, but I'm sure there are a few TV fans who have bothered to pick up the series. But before we move on, anything else you'd like to say about Lucifer? Because I think I've pretty much spoken my piece about it.
Yeah. I'll say the last thing I'll say is I would highly suggest anyone who's got Hulu or I'm sure they have plenty of encore episodes depending on the time and the hour. I'm sure you can look it up online. I would highly suggest checking out at least the first few episodes, maybe the first 2-3 episodes, and I'll be honest, if you probably don't enjoy what you see at that point, you probably won't get into the series as a whole.
Yeah, the Eiffel Tower is in episode 2.
Yeah, the Eiffel Tower, and then I think it was in episode 2 or 3 they refer to the Devil's Threesome, which
the Devil's Threesome.
The
There's
Devil's
a reason
Threesome.
they call it that.
Yeah, there's a reason you call it that. Absolutely, it's because you got the pitchforks, but or the horns, as it were. Yeah, very humorous. I thought that was very funny, and it was actually kind of not surprising at all. But I do think, I'm getting off course if I take that train of thought. But I mean, there are things that definitely came across as very odd to me. Like, he's got a piano bar in Los Angeles. It's named Lux, and it's like all that stuff is straight out of the comics. So it's like, it's definitely interesting, but there are some interesting things there, and I think that they're going to be able to develop the show interesting. This could be one of those seasons that really gets the meat down in season 1 in terms of what the show has to offer, and then really just develops that mythology over the course of a couple seasons. And I could maybe see a show like this having season 2 or 3 being much stronger than the first season. But yeah, definitely check out. I mean, if you like any of DC's offerings so far, if you even moderately care for procedurals, it's a nice change of pace from the standard procedural. It's definitely worth checking out the first couple episodes.
Okay, from there, I think we'll talk a little comics before we close the show.
All right.
I guess I'll plug the books that I've reviewed this week, and I'll speak a little on each of them without spoiling too much, because, of course, I'd like for people to check out my reviews, but all of these you can find over at darkknightnews.com. And we mentioned Adventures of Supergirl moments ago. I did review the latest digital chapter, number 3. It's been a pretty good read so far. I mean, you're only talking 9-10 page chapters so far, but it really nails the spirit of the TV show. It's quite seamless. They're kind of doing in between stories, I guess you could tell, or say it's so far they've used the villain Rampage, whom we haven't seen on the show, so they're doing things such as that. So it's good to see them not recycling villains you see on the screen, but uh, if you want to read the comics, you have to read them digital for now because they're not doing print issues like, say, they did with Smallville season 11 or Arrow season 2.5. It's going to be 13 digital chapters, and then they're collecting it into um, a trade paperback. I can't remember if I said this on a previous episode. So um, if you weren't aware of that fact, I just wanted to say it. Of course, I also had my advanced review of The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race #3, my favorite issue so far. And again, it was an honor for DC to select me to have a review up before the book even came out. Yeah, so it's nice to read something 2 weeks before everyone else does. Let's see, other titles I reviewed this week. See, Justice League #48 as we near the end of the New 52 with Rebirth coming. Yeah, just everything Jeff Johns has done on Justice League since the first issue. Everything from like Forever Evil and all that. It's just coming to a head and it's tying together. And issue #48 had some major developments, and just going forward, there's a lot that these next few issues are just going to explode. And Jason Fabok's art is incredible. It's just a great offering, with DC's top characters. There's one that's kind of slipping. Oh yeah, Superman: The Coming of the Superman by Neil Adams. I thought the first issue was really enjoyable. I don't know if Josh has had a chance to pick it up.
I did pick it up. I just haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, it's worth checking out for Superman fans. It's, again, we have Kandorians in something, but at least they're being utilized in a different way than, say, Dark Knight 3 is done, or something of that like. Let's see, Suicide Squad Most Wanted, Deadshot and Katana #2 is out this week. You're getting 2 comics for the price of 1. That was the Deadshot. Half of the comic was, again, the better of the 2, but the Katana one really stepped up from the first issue, because I thought the first Katana story was a little slower paced and not as interesting, but I'm glad to see that that portion of the book is improved. Because if you're essentially paying for 2 comic books slightly less than you normally would, you still want those 2 comic books to be good. You don't want to just pay $4.99 for Deadshot.
Right.
Let's see, Jacked number. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask if you picked up Superman Lois and Clark #5.
I'm behind on that because even though I've reviewed a couple issues of that series and I gave them great reviews and I flat out said, this is one of the best books DC's publishing. I haven't received any copies since, so I'm going to have to catch up eventually. But who knows? They could eventually send me more, or they might want me to read the trade paperback, because that's only going to be an 8-issue series.
Yeah.
So it's not like I would fall too behind on that. But yeah, Jacked #4 is out this week from Supernatural creator Eric Kripke, and 2 more issues to go in that mini. But yeah, just hilarious stuff. There aren't too many comics with a guy hallucinating a transformer, or banging his high school Spanish teacher or something like that. But yeah, you have an idea of the sense of humor Eric Kripke had on the earlier seasons of Supernatural. So here's what he can do when he doesn't have to abide by television standards and practices. But yeah, humor aside, it's also just it's a pretty enthralling series, and it's still my favorite from Vertigo. But Sheriff of Babylon is also pretty damn good, so they're almost neck and neck. I also received this very generous Dark Knight Returns 30th anniversary package, so I did a feature over at Dark Knight News. DKN celebrates 30 years of The Dark Knight Returns, so check that out. But review-wise, we're recording this on Sunday, February 28th. I should have one more review up later today because they sent me the trade paperback for Martian Manhunter Volume 1, The Epiphany, and I've knocked down most of it yesterday. So I will say so far that it is a pretty good book, but I'm obviously not going to spoil my review or give my whole judgment because I still need to finish it. But I'm expecting to have that trade paperback review up later tonight. So that's something DKN readers can look forward to. So what have you been reading, Josh?
I've actually been catching up on a backlog of Superman stuff. I had mentioned to Eric off air last week sometime. I tend to consume a lot of my comics digitally now. Although I collect physical copies, I just, they end up piling up because of, other obligations that I have. And then things get so out of order, it becomes like a chore to, find the next issue, and sort through. I'm literally having to kind of sort through. I collect quite a bit more than, well, Eric's definitely getting a lot of books now because he's getting so many for review, but I collect probably a larger quantity, so it's just a more troublesome thing. But I consume them digitally a lot, and I kind of dusted off my tablet that's pretty much solely used for reading comic books, and I've been pouring through Superman recently, and it's kind of like binge watching. It's some of these comics. Eric's done review on trades a lot, and trades definitely read differently when you're reading them in trade than when you are when you're reading the individual issues from month to month. Obviously you see things tie in a lot better. One thing that I definitely saw this week, and I really, really wanted to pick it up, was Marvel had released Scotty Young's run on The Wizard of Oz as a collected. It was, I think, 5 or 6 miniseries, like 6 or 8 issue miniseries, in like a really huge hardbound collectible. It was like ludicrously expensive, like $1.25 or something like that. And when I say that, I mean $125, because comics don't cost $1.25 anymore. But I've read that series almost in its entirety in digital, and it's really enjoyable if you like the Wizard of Oz books at all, if you like them as a kid or something like that. It's a really cutesy animated style that Scotty Young's known for. No, he's not good at drawing the Avengers, even though they make him do variant covers for some reason, but he's really good at drawing kiddie stuff, and that's definitely his wheelhouse. And if you have kids that you want to get into comics, and it's a little bit more wholesome than some of the more adult themes in Batman and other comics nowadays, but that's definitely an enjoyable read. So that's if money is not an issue to slap down on a gigantic collected edition that's $100 some, and that is something that would interest you, I highly suggest picking that up. I fingered through it a little bit, and it was just like, man, the art's great, the writing's great. It's a really good book. But Superman, I've been kind of catching up on that. I did pick up the Coming of the Superman. I haven't read that, and I actually missed this issue of Superman Lois and Clark number 5. I think they were sold out at my shop, and unfortunately I just did not have that one on my pull, so I'll have to search around and scour for that issue. But that's pretty much it. I've just had a lot of things going on. Work's been really crazy for me, so between that and home and television shows and being too lazy, I've pretty much only been reading Superman comics lately. So,
all right, I think we'll start to wrap it here. As for our upcoming episodes, maybe we'll do a few film reviews here and there. I would say we're definitely going to do a Batman versus Superman episode after that opens in theaters.
Wait, there's a Batman Superman movie coming out?
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't heard anything.
As if all the negative spam bots didn't let you know already. I'm glad. Maybe we'll discuss this in a future episode, but our episode, we need to talk about Batman versus Superman from last month, which had nothing to do with smear campaigns, but was just addressing negativity around the movie. I'm glad it's once again making its rounds, and I'd like to give a thank you to the folks at BatmanOnline.com who kind of gave us some nice compliments recently on that episode and our podcast in general. So thanks for sharing that, guys. But maybe we will comment on the spam bots. But there's a YouTuber, J-Roar. I'll just say, watch his video about the Batman versus Superman hate campaign because, yeah, he's right. And there have been articles that have come out in the past few days saying that, yes, there indeed is a smear campaign going on to try to make Batman versus Superman fail. And I'll just say I'm part of the, without naming names or corporations, I am of the ilk that thinks the conspiracy goes all the way to the top. So take that for what you will. Yeah, hopefully you'll hear from us again in a week or two. But yeah, definitely after Batman versus Superman opens, Josh and I are supposed to see one of the advanced screenings, but there's something with the theater in question that we're hoping something we were promised last year doesn't get canceled on us, but that's not something we can talk about on air.
Yeah.
It's through no fault of Warner Brothers. We're just talking about the venue.
Yeah, I'm really, really, really worried and upset about that. But yeah, I won't get into it at all.
Yeah, and before we go, I'll plug our sites as usual for all the latest Batman news, my reviews, everything Batman related. Go to darkknightnews.com for all the latest news about DC abroad. Go to dccomicsnews.com. And although it's not affiliated with this podcast, please check out wegotThisCovered.com, a great entertainment site that I write for. Be sure to check out our blog site at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com for miscellanea, our backlog of podcasts, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/a podcast for all seasons. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us, guys. I will close it saying that it's not a good idea to believe the hype about pretty much anything that's not out yet. So that's the last thing I'll say about Batman versus Superman. Well, let's just wait until it's out and judge it on its actual merits versus speculation. It's just nonsense to do anything other than that. But thanks for listening, and you'll hear from us shortly. Have a good night.